Hi everyone, and welcome to Sports Watch. If you like the content, please press the bell icon for further notifications and like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Tony Ferguson has signed with the GFL, ending his 14-year-old association with the UFC. It's really a mixed bag of emotions if you are a Tony Ferguson fan or a fan of fighting in general. Tony El Kukui Ferguson is on a 8-fight losing streak. He's 40 years old and hasn't won a fight in 5 years. And in each fight he has gone from bad to worse. What's even more concerning is the fact that he hasn't won a round in his last couple of fights. So it has been total domination from the other end. Conventional wisdom would have suggested that Tony Ferguson should have retired a few fights back. He's not getting any better, and certainly he's not getting any younger. So why spoil your legacy by getting yourselves smashed by little lesser fighters? But obviously, Tony Ferguson is beyond reasoning at this point of time. His family or friends who are close to him should have convinced him long back to hang it up. At this point of time, every time he steps in the ring, he will get beat up and embarrass himself. And what kind of promotion signs up washed up fighters anyway? One look at the GFL roster and you will realize that it's filled up with UFC rejects. He's the leftovers from the top fighting organization. Tony Ferguson isn't alone for sure. Tyron Woodley, who was on a 5-fight losing streak in the UFC, who got knocked out by Jake Paul in boxing, is also there. Then you have Alexander Gustafsson, again, who was once a great fighter, but was on a losing streak when he left the UFC. Then you have Paige Van Zandt, who has never won a fight in recent memory. Even Rashad Evans, who retired years ago, is there. Luke Rockhold, another washed-up UFC champion, is there. So essentially, GFL just wants their names to gain the eyeballs for their fights. These washed-up, older fighters won't produce great fights for sure. But the probability of some of them getting seriously hurt is out there. For Tony Ferguson, it was a bittersweet experience in the UFC. He was the best lightweights in the planet at one point of time for sure. In his prime, he was one of the most violent fighters in that division. His fights were always gory and exciting. Tony had a greater threshold for pain and an insane cardio to go along with it. His opponents would often crumble under the pressure and unorthodox fighting style. He inflicted heavy damage on his opponents and himself got hurt in the process as well. That just kept on accumulating. The turning point of his career was his fight with Justin Gaethje during COVID. He could have waited for a title shot, but he risked his shot to fight Gaethje. He lost his interim title and also received one of the most brutal beatdowns in MMA history. Without the crowd in an empty octagon, Gaethje's shots fell like thuds on Tony's skull. It was the most helpless Ferguson had been in the octagon. It was his warrior spirit that allowed him to fight as long as he did. Every fan and fighter felt worried for Tony. They feared that he would never be the same fighter after taking the beating that he took. That fight took his soul and also years from his life, probably. He never managed to win a fight since. And the UFC did him no service whatsoever. They fed him to the wolves and they tore him to pieces. Charles Oliveira almost broke his arm. Tony refused to tap. Benil Darius almost broke his leg. Tony didn't tap either. He was systematically being torn apart. Then Michael Chandler almost broke his face with a brutal knockout. Tony got knocked out cold. A part of him died in the octagon that night. A once revered fighter was now reduced to a doormat, trampled by one and all. The MMA fans urged him to retire. They didn't want to see their favorite fighter getting hurt thus. But Tony Ferguson didn't stop. It's hard to understand Tony at times, but perhaps he punished himself a bit too much in his quest for the belt. It's a shame that one of the greatest fighters in the UFC never fought for a lightweight title despite being on a 12-fight win streak. His fight with Khabib never materialized, despite being booked 5 times. It's something that bothered Tony throughout his career. He came so close to the belt, yet it eluded his grasp. Tony El Kiki Ferguson will go down as one of the greatest UFC fighters who didn't win a belt. He's a certified UFC Hall of Famer for sure. From all the fans and well-wishers across the world, let's hope that common sense prevails and Tony hangs up his gloves and spends time with his family. He has nothing else to prove. It's time from El Kukui the coach to step up and maybe help the next generation of talent. Let me know in the comment section what you feel. And if you like the content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel.